Today, we celebrate Nelson Mandela, the revolutionary leader who fought tirelessly against apartheid and injustice, becoming a symbol of peace and forgiveness worldwide. From prisoner to president, Mandela's journey embodies resilience and hope. Join us as we explore the life of a man whose courage transformed a nation and inspired the world. A tall, dignified man steps to the podium. He is 75 years old, wearing a bright patterned shirt. Nelson Mandela stands here today as the first democratically elected president of a free South Africa. On his face is the calm pride of a man who has waited a lifetime for this moment. He looks out at the crowd, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady. Then he begins to speak, and the air itself seems to listen.
Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another.
Those words ring out like a promise fulfilled. But Nelson, your journey to this podium began many decades earlier, in a humble village at the edge of a different world. Nelson, you were born in July 1918 in the tiny village of Mvezo, in the Eastern Cape. Can you tell us about your childhood there?
I was born Rolilala Mandela, which in Xhosa means pulling the branch of a tree, colloquially, troublemaker. My father, Gadla Henry Mandela, was a local chief and counselor to the Thembu king. My mother, Nosekeni Fanny, was one of his wives. I grew up surrounded by Xhosa tradition, learning from the old stories and customs of my people. My earliest memories are of herding cattle with the other boys in our village of Kunu. We would spend long days under the African sky. My mother, devout and strong, took great care to send me to school. In 1925, at about 7 years old, I began at a Methodist mission school near home. On that first day, my teacher, Miss Emdingane, gave each of us an English name. She told me, "Your new name is Nelson." I had no say in it. It was just the custom of the times, but somehow it felt important. From then on, I was Nelson Mandela at school.
Your father died when you were quite young. What happened after that?
My father passed away when I was 9. I felt very lost. My mother took me to the great place, the royal palace of Maqhekezweni, where the regent chief Jongintaba raised me as part of the royal family. It was far from Mvezo, but Jongintaba took me in. He encouraged my education, hoping I might one day become a counselor in his court. I went on to secondary school at Clarkberry, and later at Healdtown, both Methodist boarding schools. There I learned discipline and the value of hard work. I also began to see the world beyond home. We were taught European history and culture, even though at heart I remained an African boy. By my late teens, I had grown confident and curious. I never imagined a boy from Mvezo could grow to lead a nation. But even then, I knew I wanted to help my people.
Your early years must have shaped your character deeply.
I suppose they did. I was shy, yet rebellious in small ways, always asking why when I saw unfair rules. Even then, I remember thinking it couldn't be right that children who looked like me were treated as second class. But I also remember the kindness of my mother and teachers, the love of my friends. That balance of tradition and learning, of humility and questioning, stayed with me always.
Nelson, after school you attended university. Tell us about that transition.
I went to the University College of Fort Hare in 1939, in Alice, Eastern Cape. It was an elite institution for Black South Africans. I studied English, anthropology, and political science, hoping to become a clerk or lawyer for the Thembu government. Fort Hare changed my life. There I met Oliver Tambo. We became close friends. I also met many others who dreamed of a free Africa. I became active in student politics. When a college boycott broke out over food quality and fees, I took part. For that protest, I was suspended. I never returned to graduate. That was a turning point. At age 22, I left Alice and returned to Maqhekezweni for home. But arrangements had been made for me to marry. Not wanting that life, I fled to Johannesburg in 1941.
Johannesburg must have been quite different from the rural Eastern Cape.
It was. I was 23 and alone in a bustling city dominated by industry and the mining economy. I first found work as a night watchman at a gold mine, my first sight of South African capitalism. It was an eye-opener. Black workers worked under harsh conditions while the whites lived comfortably. I began to understand the injustice of our society. In Johannesburg, I finished my law studies. Walter Sisulu, a friend from Fort Hare, helped me get a job as an articled clerk at a law firm. For years, I worked by day and studied law by correspondence at the University of the Witwatersrand. Eventually, I qualified as a lawyer. In 1952, Oliver Tambo and I opened our own practice in Soweto, one of the first for Black South Africans. That same year, I co-founded the African National Congress Youth League with Tambo, Sisulu, and others. We were young, passionate, and angry that our people had no voice. We said then, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Those were our words. I truly believed that knowledge of the law, history, rights would be our path out of oppression.
In Johannesburg, you also started a family?
Yes. In October 1944, I married Evelyn Ntoko Mace. Evelyn was a nurse from my home region. We built a home in Orlando, Soweto. Our first son, Thembekile, was born in 1945, and a daughter, Makaziwe, in 1947. Later, sad to say, our baby girl died of meningitis. We loved our family life. My mother and sister even came to stay with us for a time. Even as I fought injustice in the streets and courts, Evelyn and I made a life, singing African hymns, enjoying small blessings. It grounded me and reminded me what we were fighting for.
By the early 1950s, you had risen in the ANC's ranks and began leading mass campaigns. Can you describe those years?
In those years, the oppression became unbearable. In 1952, I helped launch the Defiance Campaign. We called ordinary people to peacefully break unjust laws, like sitting on whites-only benches, entering segregated facilities. Tens of thousands answered. At a rally in Durban, I spoke to 10,000 people about the need to act. Soon I was arrested and jailed. But the campaign energized our people and grew ANC membership from 20,000 to 100,000. It also forced the government's hand. They declared martial law and banned gatherings. It showed both sides that we were determined, and it made me a wanted man. That struggle taught me something important. There is no easy walk to freedom. I quoted those words from Nehru as a warning. Freedom would cost us everything. Every protest, every strike, every step toward equality had to be earned.
In 1955, you and others adopted the Freedom Charter. You famously wrote that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. What did the charter mean to you?
The Freedom Charter was like our nation's North Star. It declared that no government can rightfully rule unless it rests on the people's will, all people of every color. It called for land for the landless, education for all, equal rights, and work. I described it as an inspiration to the people of South Africa. It was a statement of hope. The charter gave direction to our struggle. We were not fighting to replace white rulers with black rulers, but to build a democracy for everyone. In those years, I also took on leadership in the Transvaal ANC branch, eventually becoming its president. Together with Albert Luthuli and many comrades, we petitioned the government, organized rallies, and even defied bans on our movements. The government saw us as dangerous agitators. They arrested and banned us many times.
Around 1956, your personal life also changed. Evelyn left, and you married Winnie Madikizela in 1958. Winnie became very much a part of the struggle.
Winnie was, and remains, strong and brave. She stood by the cause even when times were darkest. Together we had 2 daughters, Zenani and Zinziswa. Winnie was bold, sometimes controversially so, but she endured many hardships, including imprisonment. I am forever grateful for her courage.
In 1960, after the Sharpeville massacre and the banning of the ANC, you went underground. In 1961, you co-founded Umkhonto we Sizwe, the armed wing of the ANC. How did that decision come about?
Sharpeville changed everything. On March 21, 1960, police opened fire on peaceful black protesters, killing 69. I was there with Walter Sisulu and others. We burned our own passbooks in defiance. The government's response was to ban the ANC and PAC and arrest leaders. We realized that peaceful protest alone was no longer enough. I believed as a last resort we had to push back. In 1961, I, Walter, Moses Kotane, Joe Slovo, and others formed Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation. We chose sabotage against military targets at night so as not to hurt civilians. We hoped those actions would awaken the people and force the regime to negotiate. We were inspired by freedom movements abroad, by Castro in Cuba, by Gandhi in India, by the struggles in Asia and beyond. But we also knew our struggle was ours alone. In that time, the world press even began to call me the Black Pimpernel, because I traveled in disguise and our cells were secretive. But soon the apartheid state caught up.
Nelson, in 1962 you were arrested and jailed. Then, in 1963, the police raided Liliesleaf Farm in Rivonia, arresting many ANC leaders. You were charged with sabotage and conspiracy. This led to the Rivonia trial. You made a historic speech in court. Can you tell us about that trial and your statement?
In 1962, I left South Africa as an ANC delegate and traveled in Africa to gain support. When I returned in July, I was arrested, charged with inciting strikes and leaving the country illegally. I was tried and sentenced to 5 years in prison. But in 1963, the army found our secret headquarters at Rivonia. They discovered our plans for sabotage. Soon, I and my co-accused, Walter Sisulu, Ahmed Kathrada, Dennis Goldberg, and others, were on trial in Pretoria. The government demanded the death penalty. I knew the end was near. Sitting in that courtroom, I had a choice. We could show fear, or we could speak out. So I spoke. Standing on the dock, I said, I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. Those were my words. I meant every one of them.
And when the verdict came?
They sentenced me to life imprisonment. As the guards led us away, supporters outside sang the old African anthem, Nkosi Sikelel' iAfrika. Walking out of the courtroom, I held my head up. I felt a strange calm. I told the others, the struggle is my life. I will continue fighting it. Life in prison had begun.
You spent the next 18 years on Robben Island, a barren prison far from home. What was life like there?
Robben Island was harsh and lonely. We wore prison stripes and spent every day breaking hard limestone in a quarry. The wind from the sea never really warmed, and we lived in cold stone cells. It was an attempt to break our bodies, but I never allowed it to break my spirit. We were an unlikely school. Inmates from all backgrounds studied together. I learned Afrikaner history from Johannes to Jan van Riebeek and taught other prisoners Xhosa. We held secret lessons, sharing everything we knew. The guards called me by a number, 46664, but inside my mind, I was free. I took up studying law by correspondence, and in 1989, I earned my Bachelor of Laws degree, in prison. Every diploma, every book was a victory. More importantly, I kept hope alive. For me, for every prisoner, for the people outside. I believed, even behind bars, our fight for justice could continue.
Robben Island also meant being separated from your family for many years. That must have been very hard.
It was the hardest part. Winnie and I wrote letters when we could, but visits were rare. My sons grew up without their father by their side. In 1969, my eldest son, Thembekile, died in a car crash, and I could not even attend his funeral. That pain I carry to this day. But I promised myself that I would not allow bitterness to poison me. I told myself, if I do not leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I shall still be in prison. I chose forgiveness in my heart so I could keep my mind free. On Robben Island, I also became a leader to the other prisoners. They called me Tata, grandfather, because I guided the younger ones. We supported each other. I believed that one day this would end, and a new South Africa would emerge. And so we endured, teaching, learning, dreaming. We knew that the prison walls were not walls of stone, but walls of ideology that could someday fall.
Nelson, on 11th February 1990, after 27 years, you walked out of Victor Verster prison a free man. What was that moment like for you?
I will never forget it. I stepped out into the sunlight and felt the air on my face, something I hadn't really known since the days of my youth. I looked at the blue sky and thought, we have come a long way. But I also understood. My true release was of my mind and heart. I had learned that if I carried hate, I would still be imprisoned. As I walked through that gate, I remembered what I wrote. As I walked out of the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew that if I did not leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I would still be in prison. I meant it. I was determined to use my freedom not for vengeance, but for reconciliation.
Once free, you negotiated with President F.W. de Klerk and led South Africa to multiracial elections. You often emphasized forgiveness.
Yes. I told my people and former adversaries that we must build a new country together. We had too much pain on both sides for revenge. We created the mantra, to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. I believed deeply that our freedom and justice must not be one-sided. Every South African, white and black, had a stake in our country's future. Negotiations were tense. De Klerk and I had been enemies. But I insisted we talk, listen, compromise. We formed an interim government, wrote a new constitution, and set up the first fully democratic elections. In May 1990, I addressed hundreds of thousands at the Union buildings. We have, at last, achieved our political emancipation. But I also said, we realize the task is not yet finished. The real work was beginning, the work of nation-building.
In 1993, you and President de Klerk shared the Nobel Peace Prize, and in 1994, you were elected president.
Yes, that was a beautiful moment. On 10th of May 1994, I stood at the Union buildings and took the oath. I said we pledged to liberate all South Africans from suffering and discrimination. I said our goal was to bequeath to future generations a South Africa where all peoples live together in harmony. It felt surreal, the former prisoner addressing a country united.
During your presidency, you championed reconciliation and laid down new laws. How did you see your role as president?
I said that a good head and a good heart are always a formidable combination. I meant that leadership must be wise and compassionate. I tried to apply that every day. We passed a Bill of Rights. We built schools. We improved housing. We invited all South Africans to participate. I spoke Afrikaans at times to show we respected Afrikaners' identity. We even used cricket and rugby to bridge divides. Perhaps the most famous moment was during the 1995 Rugby World Cup. The Springboks had been a symbol of division, but I saw an opportunity. I wore the Springbok jersey and held up the cup with our captain. In that moment, I thought, if the white people I represented on the field are willing to accept me, the black people of South Africa will accept the Springboks. Sports can heal. We also faced challenges. We established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission with Archbishop Tutu to allow victims and perpetrators to speak openly. It was painful and necessary. But I believed a society cannot heal without truth. One day I said to the nation, there is no future without forgiveness. We had to confront the past to move forward.
You decided to step down after one term, setting an example of democracy.
That was important to me. I said power is a blessing, not a right. After one term, I stepped aside for Thabo Mbeki, because I wanted South Africa to be a true democracy, not a lifetime presidency. I felt strongly that leaders should lead people, not cling to office.
After leaving the presidency, you continued to work for peace and justice.
I could not retire from striving for others. I used the rest of my life for charity, founding the Nelson Mandela Foundation, fighting HIV/AIDS stigma, promoting education for children. I traveled the world as an elder statesman, but always reminded people that the fight for freedom and equality is a continuing journey. I also found personal happiness later in life. In 1998, I married Graça Machel on my 80th birthday. She had been the widow of Mozambique's President Samora Machel. With her, I had a beloved second family. We enjoyed life with our children and grandchildren, proud of how far our country had come.
Mr. Mandela, people around the world called you a saint. You always dismiss that.
I said, I am not a saint, unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying. That sums it up. I am no better than anyone else. I just tried each day to do what was right for my people. I have stumbled, I have erred, but I never gave up. I feel blessed that many saw me as a symbol of hope, but I always knew I was one of many in a great movement.
Now looking back on your life, what message do you have for future generations?
My life's work was not mine alone. It was the work of many, many South Africans. I will say this: keep walking toward freedom. Keep fighting injustice with peaceful action, education, and courage. Remember this: it always seems impossible until it's done. Never lose hope. Even when the road is long and hard, believe that change is possible. Each generation must continue the walk.
Thank you, President Mandela. It has been an honor and privilege to hear your story and your wisdom.
Thank you. The honor is mine. As I have always said, freedom is indivisible. And this is not the end of the journey, only a new beginning for all of us.
Nelson Mandela's legacy reminds us that strength lies in forgiveness and unity. If his story moves you, share this episode with friends and family. Let's honor his vision by building a world rooted in equality and peace. Jai Hind. Bharat Mata Ki Jai.